everyone, and welcome to this LyricLand video with me, Mr. Linham, where today we're looking at Black History Month, and we're looking at it from a musical perspective. Before I ended up being a music teacher, I spent my time playing jazz music, and jazz music comes from America, which means we need to take a flight. So, cue the video thing.
We're expanding the world of knowledge. We're expanding our world of knowledge.
Yes, we have made it to New York. In many ways, the home of jazz music. But we don't really know much about jazz music. And actually, if we go back to the beginning of time when jazz music started, actually, we need to fly somewhere else. So now let's go to New Orleans. Okay, I'm getting way too excited with the special effects. I know, I'm sorry, I'll stop messing about. Let's talk about jazz music then. Why do I like it so much? Well, the reason I like it is because it's about improvising. When we play classical music, we're taught to read the music, play it perfectly. I don't want to play it perfectly. I want to do my own thing. I'm a wifty-wafty creative. I want to try and make my own thing. I want to sit at a piano and go. I want to find out what it is that I can do to express myself with music. Now, classical music started off like that, but as the classical musicians died over many years, people got very excited about the stuff that they wrote down. We know from history that Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and Liszt and Chopin were all incredible improvisers. But because they're not alive anymore, we don't know what their improvisations sounded like. And back then, you couldn't press record to record them improvising to capture how it was different to the sheet music. Jazz music, they got rid of the sheet music. They just improvised. Because jazz music comes from American slavery. In the plantations in the South, in a place called New Orleans and the kind of wider Texas area, we found that musicians who were working as slaves would start performing different songs. They would perform songs while they worked. They would perform songs with their friends in the evening. And we have a whole raft of different styles of music that comes from it. There's early American folk music, gospel music, blues music. All these different styles come from what happened in slavery and the African-American music tradition. Lots of people say that the reason this music happened is because you took the European music and you mixed it with the African music. And no one really agrees as to whether or not that's true. But I quite like the idea that the harmony is from Europe, all the sounds, but then the way they interpreted that European music was to give it their African rhythms and all the amazing complex drum music that we have from Africa by mixing them together. But people disagree as to whether or not that's a good way of looking at this style of music. But for me, it's about getting to the improvisation. Improvisation is the reason I love music. It's the reason I want to play. It's the reason I'm always sat at pianos or on saxophones just playing stuff, because I think there's so much music to work out. So, now it's time for a bit of jazz history.
Music history, music history, it's music history. Music history, some music history, a bit of music history. Music history.
So, the year is 1890. Way back before we could press record on a microphone, because they haven't been invented yet. Way back before we could even really film anything. You've barely got the moving image at this point. There was a trumpet player called Buddy Bolden. And Buddy Bolden was a very competitive trumpet player. When he played the trumpet, he used it with a handkerchief over his fingers so no one could work out the notes that he was making up. How cool is that? And as he played, people started to come from all over America. We had also people coming from Mexico and from South America, and they started to influence with their music. We also saw the rise of the American marching band. And after the American War of Independence, there were loads of these instruments left over from the war, like trumpets and trombones and clarinets. And all these old band instruments got left all over the country, and African Americans started to learn to play these instruments. And that's why the earliest form of jazz, known as Dixieland jazz, is played on traditional marching band instruments. We don't have a drum kit yet. We do just about have a bass, but often it's played on the tuba in the early days. And the drum kit is usually quite limited to just a snare drum. Now, my favourite trumpet player from this era comes slightly later in the 1920s. He's a man called Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong not only was amazing at the trumpet, but also he was the one that started to improvise with his voice. You might have heard scat singing as a term before, but it's when you don't use any words, you just sing freely using any syllables you like. And the whole point is that it's the notes you would play on the piano, but sung. So it doesn't matter what the sounds are or the vowels that I'm using. I've just got to make sure that I'm using the same kind of thing I would play on the piano. You get the idea. So that is scat singing, and Louis Armstrong in 1929 famously, as the story goes, forgot the words of the song he was singing and just started scatting, making it up. In this early era, people started to try and copy the music, and that's how you got songs like this, which you might recognise as The Entertainer. But actually, The Entertainer's not really jazz, it's more ragtime, because there's no improvisation there. The Entertainer is people writing it down on a piece of music and saying, this is how it goes. Jazz isn't about that. It's about expressing how you feel. And typically, the African Americans, they weren't feeling great. They had this feeling that we call the blues. The blues is a feeling that says, things are hard and bad right now, but we're optimistic it's going to get better. And that's something that I think we find in pretty much all African American music, from James Brown to Aretha Franklin to Michael Jackson to even the more modern stuff like Beyonce. There is still blues hidden in there. You might not hear it with all the modern production, but it's still in there. Now in the 30s, that's when we start to get to my favourite era of jazz, and that's why I've got my saxophone with me. And I'm just going to get my saxophone now. Special effects. This is good, isn't it? Isn't this good? Nice to be out of the house. So, this is my saxophone. This is an alto saxophone. In the 1930s, there was kind of two amazing players. A man called Lester Young, who was quite famous for doing like really smooth, silky sounds, timbres, and a man called Coleman Hawkins, who liked to use a growly sound. So, which one am I doing first? Am I being Lester Young or am I being Coleman Hawkins? Have a listen to this. Here's the second one. Hopefully you can hear the difference. Teacher, pause the video now to see if the class got it right. Which one came first? Lester Young or Coleman Hawkins? Hopefully you realise that was, of course, Lester Young first. Coleman Hawkins, I'm making a growly sound in my throat. You can kind of see my chin moving. And I'm actually going, oh, while I'm playing the saxophone, and that's how you get that sound. This was all brand new. Before the American jazz musicians started playing saxophones, the saxophone was a bit of a joke. It had been invented in the 1800s, about 1860, by a Belgian man called Adolphe Sax. And people in the orchestra were like, oh no, saxophones can't be in the orchestra. Go away. We don't like the sound of it. And then jazz musicians took it, particularly the jazz musicians in America, and that meant that suddenly this music could be played on the saxophone. In the 1940s, jazz really starts to take hold in America with a new style. Because through the 30s, as we go almost into the Second World War, we have this kind of swing era of music where it's all big bands. There's bands like Duke Ellington's band and Count Basie's band, and they're the reason why I have my own big band now, because I love that music. Lots of the melodies from the swing era were quite repetitive, and actually if you look at our Hello Mr. Linham song that we sing, that would be considered a swing era piece of music. The moment we've got that kind of repeated melody, that repeated melody, we call them riffs, and that is full in Duke Ellington's music, in Count Basie's music. They're absolutely full of them. Riffs absolutely everywhere. In fact, the early 30s albums, that's basically all it is. There's not really that many melodies. As they move through history, they obviously develop, and that takes us to the 1940s, probably my favourite era, because there's a man called Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker says, I don't want to play the music like everyone else has, just like we talked about at the beginning with the improvisation. He found his own way of doing it differently. And he was very young, he was on an alto saxophone, and he absolutely broke the rules by creating a new style of music called bebop. And bebop, that's the name of it, was called bebop because when you play it, it sounds like someone going bebop. Jimmy go bebop on the end. Can you hear all that? Bebop, bebop, boop, and it's quite angular. If you were to draw a picture of that, it wouldn't be like a pretty flowy shape. It'd be like lots of kind of pointy edges, I imagine, if you're feeling creative in that kind of drawing-y way. But yeah, that's the kind of bebop-y sound. One of my favourite things he ever played was this opening of a really sad ballad called Lover Man, which is all about someone being in love with someone else and them not being in love back, which is not something I can relate to. But the opening sounds like this. And he has that jazz cry in there. I'm not sure I quite get the jazz cry, but that's the jazz cry, isn't it? That's the sense of yearning that I think all great music has, from Olivia Rodrigo to back then. There's still yearning everywhere. Music is about expressing emotion, isn't it? That's what everybody's trying to do. So then we move out of the 1940s into the 1950s. We get a style called hard bop. It's like the bebop, but it's kind of got some churchier influences. It's a bit slower. It's not as chromatic. Charlie Parker would quite famously play these really fast runs. This is one of his famous saxophone runs, where we call it a run because it's like someone running. They play really, really fast. Really fast, right? You can barely work out the notes. And actually, you get to the 50s and suddenly people are playing, like one of my favourite saxophone bands, Hank Mobley. You get much broader, warmer phrases. It's not to say that people don't play fast, because they do, but you get, it's slightly less intense. And the 50s is where our little project, yes, we've got a project to do, is going to happen today. I'm going to put a list of different jazz musicians onto the screen in a little bit. And on your Chromebooks, you're going to make me a presentation on one of them. So you could look at Miles Davis. Miles Davis played with Charlie Parker in the 40s, and then through the 50s to even the 80s, he made a whole series of absolutely wild albums, from these beautiful ones in the 50s to these ones that created modal jazz, to these ones that created electronic jazz in the 70s and then later in the 80s. In fact, some of his 80s albums have got people rapping on them. You'd never believe it. He has such a journey. You should also have a look at the music of John Coltrane. John Coltrane quite famously did an album called Giant Steps. That's a great album. And that's all about moving between 3 different keys at the same time. Very bright moving. Very different sound and quite hard for our ear to follow. Sonny Rollins is another great player. He practiced quite famously under the bridge in New York. I've never practiced under a bridge. Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker, all great beboppers from the 1940s. Or if you'd like to find out about musicians that have got really large bands, go back to the 30s. Count Basie or Duke Ellington. And in groups that your teachers will put you in, I want you to make little presentations on some of the music they made. Maybe you could work out what their most famous songs are. Who was in their bands? The names of famous musicians. Because you will find an absolute wealth of amazing music, talented people. These people were talented, and by gosh, did they practice. The whole rule of 10,000 hours is that you should, if you want to be good at something, you should practice for 10,000 hours. Well, it sounds like a lot, but if you practiced for half an hour every day for about 5, 6, maybe 8 years, I think you'd probably meet the 10,000 hours. I haven't done the maths. Maths teachers, feel free to check. So I'd love for you to make these lovely presentations. So pick an artist or pick an album. Where was it recorded? Who played on it? What was the name of the different tracks on it? So you need to get on with the presentation then, everybody. Teachers, why don't you put some jazz on? Maybe some Coltrane, some Miles Davis. It's cool music. If you want to be really wacky, you could put on some Ornette Coleman. He played music that my mum calls quite unlistenable. So make your presentations and then have fun presenting to the class, and then I'll wrap up this video in a minute. Well, I hope you've enjoyed looking at Black History Month with me, because I absolutely love jazz music. I'm really passionate about it. I've spent 4 years of my life studying this music. I think it's really great, and I love it because they break all the rules. They go, this is the framework in which we are working, do what you like. And I think that's a really great joy. So to finish this video, I'd like to play you one of my favourite pieces. This is by Duke Ellington. I think it came out in like 1925, 26, something like that. And it's about taking the train from the north of New York to the south of New York. And it's called Take the A Train. I hope you enjoy this. This is how we're going to finish. All you've got to do is sit and listen to this music and think, does it sound like a train? Well, let's see how I play it. Well, there we go. That was Take the A Train by Duke Ellington. I was trying to get some of the train sounds in. Not sure if that really sounds like a train. But there we are. I hope you've enjoyed exploring Black History Month with me. It's amazing to talk about this music that I absolutely love. And if you've liked any of the music we've listened to today, please do go home, put it on. You know, you've all got smart speakers, grown-ups, they can help you with that, okay? Get some jazz music on. It makes you feel free. And that's what we want, really, isn't it? See you all for another video sometime very soon. Bye. Roll the credits.
Oh no, that's the end of the lesson. Oh no, that's the end of the lesson. I hope you remember all the stuff we did, 'cause the videos have cost me like £1,000. Toodles, 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 and see you next week. I miss you loads, you know it.